No institution can possibly survive if it needs geniuses or supermen to manage it. It must be organized in such a way as to be able to get along under a leadership composed of average human beings. Peter Drucker, management consultant, educator, and author. Good morning. Welcome to another morning episode of the Liberty Dad podcast, a discussion on politics and culture. If you're tuning in live, I especially thank you for giving me your time so ever early. So, today, I have been kind of observing this kind of like dispute between Mark Cuban and Elon Musk on Twitter. And basically, it's got Mark Cuban. He is arguing in favor of DEI, that's diversity, equity, and inclusion, these kind of programs that exist in corporate America. And then you've got Elon Musk, who is, well, you know what? Let's just pull it up. Let's see what they're actually saying. So let's get that up on the screen here, and we can just talk about that. Let's see. There we go. All right. So this is let's back up a wee bit here so that we can see what Elon Musk initially started out with saying. And why is it going off the screen a little bit? Let's adjust that here real quickly here. There we go. Okay, perfect. So Elon Musk at one point said to somebody else, he said discrimination on the basis of race, which DEI does, is literally the definition of racism. That Mark Cuban didn't particularly care for that. And so he kind of shot back and he said, "Look, let me help you out and give you my thoughts on DEI." And he's got a number of tweets here. I'm not really going to read all of them, just kind of some of the most important parts. He said, diversity, good business, good businesses look where others don't to find the employees that will put your business in the best possible position to succeed. You may not agree, but I take it as a given that there are people of various races, ethnicities, orientation, etc., that are regularly excluded from hiring consideration. And then he goes on to say, by extending our hiring search to include them, we can find people that are more qualified. The loss of DEI phobic companies is my gain. So, um, I don't think he's correct on this, not even slightly. He does go through a little bit more, and he identifies, like he says, equity, treating. Wait a minute, did I skip the diversity? Oh no, we already read that. So he goes on. And he says, equity, treating people equally, does not mean treating them the same. I made the mistake for a lot of years thinking it did. Equity is a core principle of business. And then he goes on to inclusion, and he says, one of my favorite things is that one of my favorite sayings is that Quote, great employees reduce the stress of those around them, end quote. Great companies create environments that reduce unnecessary stress of their employees. And then he goes on and he has some more things to say. So I thought that was kind of interesting. But the problem here is that Mark is either being disingenuous or he just literally doesn't know what he's talking about. Now you might say, DL, come on, Mark Cuban, he's a billionaire, he owns companies. Like, you're a podcaster, you work for corporate America. Like, how is it that you're going to know better? Well, turns out I can read and I can go back through history before this conversation popped up. So here's one of the interesting things. If you want to learn about what the conversation was prior to a particular event, make go to Google and type in the search bar, and then over to the right there is an option where you can narrow your search down by the year. So what I did was I just said, like, let me go look up what was being written and said about DEI prior to this conversation. Right? It doesn't even have to go far back. I mean, we can go far back, and I've got a few articles here that do. I think one goes all the way back to 2012. Okay, we're in 2023. Like, this is like 11 years ago, and so you can go back and you can look and see what was written about it. Now, in my response, I kind of responded in a way. Where did it go here? Lost my own response. How terrible. I can find my response. Let's see here. I think I can. Seems to have disappeared. I had it all queued up and ready this morning, doing much better than I had. I can That's okay. Let me go to this screen here and we will do this. Bam. All right. So I think I got it back. Apologies for that, folks. A little delay there. All right. Let's see here. So here's what I said in response to Mr. Cuban. I said Google DEI with search set prior to 2024 and read the many articles describing it otherwise. None of these four articles mention anything about hiring the best. You're making stuff up. Was a little unpleasant there. And that comment was in response to Elon Musk then at one point said, let me get this right back on the screen there. In response to Mark Cuban, what I just read, Elon Musk then came along and said, well, cool. So when should we expect to see a short white slash Asian women on the Mavs? And so then Mark Cuban responds back. He said, since this seems to be the most common response, and I'm not going to read the whole thing here because he's got quite a bit. He said, this seems to be the most common response. Let me address it. DEI does not mean you don't hire on merit. Of course, you hire based on merit. Diversity means you expand the possible pool of candidates as widely as you can. Once you have identified the candidates, you, and then he puts this in all caps, hire the person you believe is the best. Bring that up there. He says, what makes the whole what about the players comment ridiculous is that it presumes that all positions are hired based on some quantitative rather than subjective version of merit. They aren't. Even choosing the best basketball player is very much a guess, which is why best players weren't always the first pick in the draft and go undrafted. So he's kind of being a bit of evasive here, and he's not really addressing the question that people are asking, which is the whole point of DEI is to make a company look representative of America. Like, we hear that all the time, right? This is what people say. They will say things like, "We look out at this company and we don't see that it reflects America." So people are holding him to that very same standard, and they're saying, "Okay, the Mavericks, when I look at the basketball players, they don't look like America." Right. Well, now we can skip and say, okay, well, since it's, you've kind of got the NBA and the WNBA, we can just kind of set aside the male female dynamic and we can just look at the race, right? Even by virtue of race. And I don't have the stats on his team. And so they're holding him to that standard and saying, why doesn't that? And at one point, and it was in that same response there. I think it was. Let's see here. Da, 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 da. I can't remember what he in one of his responses, he pointed out and he said something like the the company as a whole does, and again, he's being evasive because when people look, they look at a particular segment of the company and they say, well, this doesn't look like it. And usually they look at either higher level, they look at higher level positions, or they look at front facing positions. Right. So this is the standard that gets held to other companies. And this is the standard that people are now looking and saying, okay, well, tell us about the Mavericks. Tell us about why is it that when we look at the Mavericks, you're like, well, like he's basically saying if you had a restaurant, he's like, "Well, the front of the house may not look like this, but if you include the back of the house, we're totally diverse." Okay, well, that's the point, Mark. The point is when we look at this very large segment of the company, very important one, we're not seeing it, right? Which is the core of what DEI hopes to accomplish. So now let's take a look at so again, going back to my comment here, where I said Google DEI with search set prior to 2024 and read the many articles describing it. Otherwise, none of these four articles mention anything of hiring the best. So I'm gonna tell you what these four articles. I'm not gonna read the whole article. All I'm gonna do is let you know the titles of these. I just simply did a Google search and I grabbed some of the first ones that I found. So the one of and these come from between like 2020 in 2022. So I didn't even go that far back. But so one of them comes from the uschamber.com and it's titled, What is DEI? Defining Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. The next one is Iowa Division of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, DEI definitions. Then there's another one, Harvard Business Publishing. Start Here, a primer on diversity and inclusion, part one of two. The fourth one that I pulled from Gallup.com, workplace equity, the E in DEI and why it matters. So then what I did was I clipped for him. I was responding to Mark Cuban. I don't think he saw me because I'm not a blue check and I'm a smaller account and whatnot, but I chimed in anyway, at least for the benefit of other people. And so I posted these four articles and then I just did a snippet just to kind of illustrate that none of these articles are talking about, well, you do this and then you hire the best. Because at the end of the day, and we'll get into it in a moment, the best may still not end up looking like people want an organization to look like. Now, that's not to say that there aren't successful Black folk out there or Asian folk or, whatever, whatever minority that we are looking at and we're saying is underrepresented. That's not to say that they aren't out there. And I'll address that in just a moment. But at the core, if you're really looking for, um, if DEI is about just simply hiring the best and just kind of broadening your search so that you hire the best, then it would be producing that, and we would see that in the commentary prior to this conversation, right? Before it started getting the kind of pushback that it's getting now. So let's take a look and we'll see what we've got here. So let me pull that up on the screen so that you can see kind of some of the stuff that I was highlighting here. All right. So, and again, I'll put these in the show notes so you can go and read them yourselves because I want to make sure that if I present something, I'm not presenting it out of context. I'm not going to put the whole thing into context because I'm dealing with, various articles here, but the links are there and then you can read them yourselves and you can determine whether or not I have come to this proper conclusion. So it says hire, um, hire and promote diverse employees. One of the best ways to start incorporating your DEI strategy is by surveying the demographic makeup of your organization. Inspect your recruitment and promotion practices to understand how both impact the diverse talent in your workforce. If you find your business lacks diversity in leadership, you'll want to consider promoting or hiring diverse employees so they can bring different insights and perspectives to the company. And you see, nowhere in here do they talk about hiring the best. They don't say go out and just expand your net so that you get a larger pool of applicants. And then from there, hire the best. And we're just sure that by doing that, it's going to result in a more diverse workplace. No, what this is saying is start by surveying the demographic makeup. look and say, hey, do we have the right demographic makeup, whatever that might mean? If not, then start putting people into different places, right? It didn't say anything about being the best. So, right off the bat here, this first article, this clip here. All right, second one. This one's from the University of Iowa article. DEI at the University of Iowa works to maintain a civil campus culture by practicing and teaching respect for every person and issue. This includes all students, faculty, and staff, no matter their visible or invisible disability, race, ethnicity, veteran status, sexual orientation, or religion. So again, at the University of Iowa, their attempt is to maintain a civil campus culture. They're not trying to, they're not trying to get the best to rise to the top, as Mr. Cuban is saying. Next article: privilege is the key to understanding lack of equity. Generations of preferential treatment have put certain groups ahead and led to widening disparity with other less privileged groups. And again, see, here we're talking widening disparity, right? They're trying to resolve a disparity. They're not trying to bring the best in, as Mark keeps saying. Groups that are not privileged may be marginalized, underrepresented, or underserved. As we embrace diversity and work to create inclusion, equity, and belonging for all, we must address how this privilege operates and work to balance its impact. So their goal is to balance, they're saying, hey, the goal here is to balance the impact of this disparity of privilege that has occurred over many years. And we could argue about whether or not that exists and how best to approach it. Right now, all I'm doing is I'm pointing out what is what was written about DEI in comparison to what Mark Cuban is trying to say now. All right, last one. Story highlights. Leaders who want a successful workplace need to ask, what is equity? At its most basic level, workplace equity is about fairness, not excellence. Fairness. DEI programs should prioritize equity as much as diversity and inclusion. Okay. So this should dispel the myth of Mr. Cuban trying to say that it's about excellence, right? Companies have been seeking out the best forever. They want the best. If I have a company, let's say I own a company and I want the best manager, I'm going to look for the best person. Now, the idea that's driving DEI is to suggest that I would maybe say I would prefer white person over a black person. And there may be a case for that. I'm not gonna argue that doesn't happen. That would be foolish. We know that happens. We've watched it happen. We've seen it happen in areas where it's less contested, right? Where people pick somebody for a reason that's unrelated. In fact, I'll tell you a story that's unrelated to race so that you understand that there is a reality here. Okay, so we're gonna. It's always good to step away from the more charged topic and see if we can illustrate an idea in something that's a little bit less charged. So here's something that's less charged, but it's probably happened to uh, if you're watching or you're listening, you may know somebody that something has happened that you may know somebody that has had a similar experience. So many, many years ago, when I was like in my early 20s, I was working at Burger King and I really wanted to make management. I worked really hard. And I got hired in right about the same time as another fellow. And we ended up, for whatever bizarre reason, we ended now this Burger King was attached to one of the truck stops on the side of the road. So it wasn't a standalone Burger King. And so they had this issue where they kind of cycled through some management over the Burger King for a few months. Like they had a couple different ones, and eventually we got to one that kind of stuck around for a while and wasn't crazy. We had a few crazy ones, and it was a woman. And so I had a woman boss, and I was working, I believe, kind of like you might call it like a second shift or the later shift where I would close. And I really, really wanted to work the breakfast shift for whatever reason at the time. I don't remember. Well, my peer got hired. He got a position above me, right? He became like some sort of like not actual management. It was kind of like one of those like shift lead type things where it's like pretend management. So there I was still working and he got like this position. Okay, like whatever, like that happens, no big deal. And then I found out that his mom had gotten the job for breakfast manager, the one that I wanted. And I was like, and at first I was like, okay, well, that's how the cookie crumbles, right? Like that's just the way things go. Well, then one day I stumbled across my boss and this nice young man who got hired at the same time I did, kissing in the back room. Oh, I see. Now I see why this wasn't about the best. This is about your preference. Your mom got a job because you're banging the boss, and I didn't get the job because I wasn't banging the boss, right? And, like whatever. Like that's what happens. Like people are people. They make these kind of decisions. So now this doesn't, I'm not trying to compare my story to the plight of minorities who've been rejected. All I'm trying to say is like, look, people hire for, they make these kind of decisions, and they're not always about the best, and these kind of things do happen, right? Mine was less severe. Obviously, if somebody's a racist and they just hate black people and they don't want to hire, they want black people to work in the more subservient roles and they don't believe that they're good enough for management. Well, that's worse, right? Like that's clearly worse. But all I'm doing is illustrating that yes, people make these kind of decisions. It does happen. Okay. But the question is, what is the answer? How do we respond to that? And I think that the answer is if first and foremost, we need to cancel DEI. It's not working. But I want to make one more point about DEI, because this comes from, I think it's a 2017 paper that I happened to read a couple years ago. So let me pull that up. So this is called "The Cat in the Hat." The cat is out of the bag: Orientalism, anti-blackness, and white supremacy in Dr. Seuss children's books. And you might be like, "What? What? Like, what has this got to do with DEI?" Well, I'm going to tell you. So back a while back, you might remember that there was a big kerfluffle about Dr. Seuss books, and you're like, "Oh, there's like all this racism embedded in there, and we got to remove them." Well, as it turns out, this article, which is dated from February 2019, these what is it, Katie Ishizuka and then Ramon Stevens, these are the authors, and they actually talk about here in how DEI is applied. So let's just get right to that portion of the study. It's a 51-page study. I don't know that you need to read it, but I'll post the link in the show notes just in case you want to see it. Because again, I want to be upfront and honest with all of my sources so that you know whether or not I am treating this topic fairly. So let's get down here. All right. So where do we go? All right. So they're basically, this whole article is basically talking about the racism that's involved in the books and how it's anti-blackness. It pushes white supremacy, and how something needs to be done about this. Right. We need to do something more for the minority students, so that they can see some positive representation. So here they say, in addition to positive imagery exposure. So this is where they're talking about the books. The larger goal is to reduce the impact of implicit bias on people's behavior by creating awareness around the existence of implicit bias and its roots within larger systemic and social conditions, including children's literature. This in alignment with a large body of research that demonstrates exposure to information regarding diversity, equity, and inclusion impacts one's future decision making processes and inspires a conscious evaluation of judgments, interactions, and choices that may reify social and psychological oppressions. So, again, here in 2019, they're saying, look, in addition to creating more positive imagery in children's literature, this is aligned with this goal, with this body of research that says that if you're exposed to information about diversity, equity, and inclusion, that it will impact your decision making processes, and it will make you more conscious about your judgments and your interactions with the whole goal of reifying social and psychological oppressions. So again, like we keep looking at we can look at articles that are written online and maybe the journalist got it wrong. We could also look at studies that were done where people, what's up, buddy? My producer is here. Morning, buddy. We'll be done in a bit. Um, they are the goal here is to reduce the social and psychological oppressions. Nothing in here about, hey, we want to make sure that we're hiring the best. The impression that they're putting out is that if you don't see a black CEO, then it's systemic racism. That's what they're talking about. They're not talking about, oh, you know what? We want to make sure that you are indeed hiring the best. And we want to make sure that your pool includes the best of minorities who may be the best overall. That is not what they're saying anywhere in the literature. They're not saying it in articles that are written. They're not saying it in studies that are written. They're very clearly telling you this is about dealing with oppressions and changing people's attitudes and judgments so that they're more conscious of what they want them to be conscious about. There's nothing here. Mark Cuban is absolutely incorrect. Now the question is he incorrect um because he doesn't know any better, or has he bought into it? I don't know. I'm not going to try to speculate because honestly I don't care, and neither should you. Who cares why he's incorrect, right? Like, he's just incorrect. Go back to the drawing board. He wants to talk about excellence. Start with himself. Be excellent about what he's talking about. Within the social justice movement, words sometimes do change meaning, even definition. Supporters will go with it, acting like the new meaning is what has been meant the whole time. That's not the case. We need to start calling people out. Sometimes you might have to do a little research. You might have to go back and say, like, hey, look, uh, that's not what this has been for decades. For decades, it's been talked about as something entirely different. Why all of a sudden now are we going to pretend like DEI is about just simply hiring the best and making sure that your pool of candidates happens to be a complete pool? That's really what he's saying. And the reality is businesses can do that without any kind of DEI program. Do they really need a program to be like, all right, look, we're going to make sure um, that we're not just having a pool of really great white candidates, but we have a pool of really great white candidates and black candidates and Native American candidates and so on and so forth, right? They're not like they could do that already. They don't need a program, right? Why? So the question is, why aren't they getting it? Well, I think that the reality is you cannot create diversity in various fields unless the people seeking those fields are first diverse. And you cannot force people to be where they are not interested in being. Think of it this way. The NBA is something like 75% black folk, and the NFL is somewhere around the same, right? But then if you look at the NHL, they are like almost entirely white. But I'm not like I don't know sports, so I can't really go too deep into this. But I do know enough to know that they have very, very few black folk in hockey, and so none of the three NHL, NFL, NBA, none of them are representative of America. And the first thing that I would argue is say it's okay. It's okay that they're not, because this is what different groups have chosen to focus on, right? Now, what I mean by that, I'm not saying that like all black people are only basketball players or NFL players. What I'm saying is young kids, when they are growing up in the black community, there are quite a few of them that really want to be NFL stars or NBA stars. That is okay. You don't hear a lot about young black kids wanting to be economists or you know, CEOs of a business. Like there are some, but I think there's like what, a handful, but there are some, right? And so that's the thing. we have to first acknowledge and accept that people aren't seeking these kind of positions in a diverse manner. Now, there may be some argument that you could say, well, they're not seeking it because we're not promoting it, and that's fine. Feel free to promote it and say, hey, you know what? You too could be this particular person. But at the end of the day, if they've made a different choice, one that doesn't lead to a representative demographically representative workforce, then you need to accept that, right? All we need to do is simply remove barriers. That's it. Remove barriers and let them be. Now, you may have noticed that the thumbnail for the show shows a picture of like something burning, right? And what that is, I'm gonna pull that up on the screen. Well, I'm not gonna pull that on the screen in itself, but I'm gonna talk about that real quick. Did I not have it? So we're gonna pull that right back up here. Um, all right. So you may be familiar with something called Black Wall Street. No, I typed in the wrong thing. Black Wall Street. Where did it go here? Oh, I lost it, but that's okay. Um, so the picture is of the Tulsa Race Massacre, which happened in 1921. In 1921, just to kind of, you had like over I don't know, I'm not going to put this on the screen. I'm just going to kind of tell you about it. So I'm reading from the Wikipedia entry here on the Tulsa Race Massacre. Now, if you don't know what the Black Wall Street was, it was an area in Texas, I'm sorry, Oklahoma, that was a thriving community, a thriving Black community. There was a lot of successful businesses and so on and so forth. And so you ended up having this. In fact, let's see here. Where did it go? The attackers burned and destroyed more than 35 square blocks of the neighborhood, at the time one of the wealthiest Black communities in the United States, colloquially known as Black Wall Street. Okay, so we're talking about the Tulsa Race Massacre, and this happened between May 31st and June 1st, 1921. You had mobs of white residents, that some who, and I'm reading, some who had been appointed as deputies and armed by city government officials. They attacked Black residents and destroyed homes and businesses in the Greenwood district in Tulsa, Oklahoma. It's considered one of the worst incidents of racial violence in American history. 2 days, more than 800 people were admitted to hospitals. As many as 6,000 Black residents of Tulsa were interned in large facilities, many for several days. Very terrible, awful story, right? And what started it? Um, y- the- what started is probably there was racism at the time, right? Like that's probably the core of it at the end of the day. Now, I'm sure that there'll be some different arguments about, this and that contributed to it. But at the end of the day, we know in 1920s, racism existed and it was acceptable, right? Like you could be an outright racist and you wouldn't get fired. You wouldn't get canceled. That didn't happen, right? So what's the point of bringing that up? In 1920, we didn't have things that we have today that I believe are actually holding people back from being successful. And I'm gonna give you three, just three things. Okay. Number one, we need to end the war on drugs. Number two, end occupational licensing. And then the last one is to literally stop trying to help people. Because when we try to help people, we come up with these clever ideas like DEI and we're going to do all this stuff. And then businesses spend, hordes of money. In fact, let me just read that to you. Where did it go here? Because that was very interesting. This, where did it go here? Hold on, buddy. Hold on. We're almost done. Daddy's a little bit, he's a little bit he had a good flow going, but then he messed it up. So I was trying to find where some of the amount of money that has been put into diversity training and DEI and all this good stuff. Oh, here it is. Okay, so in 2003, it was estimated that corporations in the United States spent $8 billion annually on diversity. They spent $8 billion, and we don't even have a Black Wall Street. I mean, think about that for a minute. $8 billion and no Black Wall Street. We had a Black Wall Street in 1920. They didn't spend $8 billion then. right? It's because we keep coming up with these ideas that don't make any sense because all they're actually at the end of the day doing is just satisfying white people. They're not really helping black people. They're not. Because if they were, since 2003, 20 years ago, 21 years ago, we would have seen we wouldn't be watching 2 billionaires slug it out on Twitter over whether or not DEI works. We wouldn't have to because it would already be it would already be present. We would already have the results. Mark Cuban wouldn't be trying to come up with this flowery language to describe what it is. He would say, "Look, in my business, here's here's where we were before DEI." And then he would come and do the results later. Imagine if Mark Cuban had to go on Shark Tank with DEI. It would get laughed at. It would be like, "Dude, so what's the return?" And he wouldn't be able to tell you the return. He would just tell you, like what it's supposedly going to do. Right. So we need to stop trying to help people in these ways. Right. We can help them in other ways. We can help minorities in other ways. Now, the big difference between 1920 and today is in 1920, you didn't have your civil rights protected. You have them protected now. Like, remember what I just read that in 1920, you had like some 800 people that were hospitalized, and a whole bunch of white people. Some were deputized by the government. That would not happen today. You would not get a large mob of white people that would go down to, like, I'm in Jacksonville. They couldn't go down to the Jacksonville sheriff's office and say, "You need to deputize us because we're going after some black folk." That would not happen today. It happened in 1921, but it wouldn't happen today because we have an entirely different circumstance today. However, because of that, we could actually have a Black Wall Street if we did at least just those three things: end the war on drugs, because that sends our police to go and pick up people and for victimless crimes, and occupational licensing, which cuts people off at the knees when they want to start a business. If you want to be a hairdresser, which many black folk are, and I've talked about this before in the past, you have to legally go in many states and get training for it, and which means you now have to put out more before you can even start earning a dollar, right? And when you raise the barrier, this investment barrier, then no people, a lot of people aren't going to be able to get in. People that are struggling. I've said this before. There was a story a while back where a young man was given haircuts. No, no, that's not the story, but that's a good story too. The story that a young man refused to take his hat off at school, and he got in trouble for it. So he got sent to the principal's office, and he was a young black kid, and the principal was a black man. And they're like, "Hey, what's going on here? Why are you refusing to take your hat off?" And the young kid said, "Man," he basically told me, he's like, "Look, I got a crappy haircut, and kids are gonna make fun of me." And the principal took pity on him, and I guess he was on the side, his hustle or whatever was cutting hair. So, I think he either cut the guy's hair. I'm trying to remember. It's been a while, but he either cut the young man's hair or he took him to go get a haircut. I can't remember which one, but he ended up resolving it, right? And so the idea, and I'm pretty sure I shouldn't have brought up that story on the moment without knowing for sure the details. So I apologize, folks, but I'm pretty sure that the principal himself cut the hair. And so what I'm pointing out is this young man, he was like in junior high. He knew, and all his friends knew what a good haircut looks like. Everybody knows what a good haircut looks like. I could go, not me because I'm bald, but I could go and if I had hair, I could go and get my hair cut. And I don't need somebody to show me that they've got training. I can look at the people walking out and say, "You know what? They do a really good job." Or word of mouth. "Hey man, you want a good haircut? Go to so and so." So and so could be a barber with an actual barber shop. So and so could be the guy down the road that cuts hair on his front porch, right? We need to end occupational licensing because many of the ways that people could improve their lot in life um, are taken from them because they first have to invest. You all right? Yeah. A producer, I think he's getting a little anxious. We need to remove these kind of barriers from people and allow them to go be successful in whatever way they can be. So ending the war on drugs, because then we wouldn't be throwing people in prison unnecessarily for a victimless crime. um, ending occupational licensing, and stop trying to help people because we just come up with these elaborate ideas that are dumb and don't work even after 20 years. We spend $8 billion on diversity for 2003 and 2023. We still don't have a demographic in the areas that we want where it's a value. Well, I'm saying that wrong. We don't have what we're looking for. And what we're looking for doesn't make sense because that's not what people are seeking out. We need to respect their choices and we're not. We keep trying to help people by saying, hey, look, we're going to create this diversity, inclusion, or equity and inclusion program. And that's going to be to help out minorities who've been historically subjected to racism and other kinds of discrimination, which is true. But we're going to come up with this elaborate program. And then we fail to recognize that only a small handful of people from those groups are really trying to seek out the areas that we want to see a difference in, right? A lot of kids want to be a basketball player. That has to change. And I'm not making that a negative. That's a fine thing. Like it's okay. And it's a parent's job. It's a whole entirely different conversation, but it's a parent's job to say, look, you want to be a basketball player? That's cool. Go get your education first so that in case that, so you have a backup plan. That's an entirely different conversation to have. Now, I want to end this by showing you a quick video here. And this is from one of my favorite economists, Walter Williams. And he is talking about, so it's in this documentary, and the title, I can't remember the title of the documentary is, but he provides insight into how he became so well respected, right? Why people, he's an economist and he's very well respected. And he gives us a little bit of a clue into how this came to be. In other words, did he need diversity, equity, inclusion? No, he didn't. He managed to be pretty well revered. And he was born in like, I don't know, he died like a few years ago at the age of like 84, 83, something like that. So he was born quite a while ago when he experienced racism for sure. In fact, he actually says so. So let's pull this up really quick. All right, there we are.
At UCLA,
Oh,
they gave me
hold on.
inspiration.
Hold on, we got the wrong one. I tell you, this guy over here doesn't know what he's doing. All right, so let's back this up a little bit and play.
At UCLA, they gave me inspiration to think with my brain instead of my heart. That was probably maybe the beginning of my switching from one kind of radical to another.
With a head full of new ideas, Walter accepts a full-time assistant professorship from Cal State's economics department. A long way from the Philadelphia projects.
I often tell people that I am very, very happy that I got virtually all of my education before it became fashionable for white people to like black people. So what that meant is that when I got a C, it was an honest to God C. When I got an A, it was an honest to God A. They weren't practicing affirmative action and they didn't give a damn about my self-esteem.
All right. So he tells us, he's like, look, it's fashionable now for white people to like black people. And he's correct. He's absolutely correct. This has become a fashionable thing. This is where we get the term virtue signal from. And this is why it's not working, because it's become a fashionable thing, not a productive thing. Do I want to add anything else? There was an article here. Should I talk about it? No, I think we're done. I think that's enough. At the end of the day, folks, if we want to see, first and foremost, stop trying to put people in a box. Stop trying to tell people that we need to see a certain representation. Otherwise, it's racist, because it's not. It doesn't mean it's racist. It means people made different choices than you might like to make. Nobody cares. Nobody gives a damn, to use the words of Walter Williams there. Nobody gives a damn that you don't see a certain percentage in a business that matches the percentage out in the world. Nobody cares about that, right? Care about just finding excellent people. Now, if that means that Mark Cuban's words like, hey, maybe you evaluate your company and you do say like, look, we're really not, we need to expand our net a little bit. so that we can include different groups of people a little bit better. That's fine. That's a fine goal. There's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. That would be a great goal. And I actually agree with what he says in terms of how businesses should approach the world. Problem is, it's just not DEI. DEI puts a priority on one's minority status, and it becomes this fashionable thing for white people that who like for fashionable for white people to signal their virtue, how great they are. But at the end of the day, after 20 years, after billions of dollars have been spent, we're still in the same spot. So that's my show. Hope you enjoyed it. Let's see. We got any comments in here do I need to address? Let's take a look. I haven't even looked at the comments yet. Hopefully I'm not getting got a few comments here. Let's see what we got. All right. All right. Yes. Another a great economist who's still living, by the way, and he's like 93 or something like that. Thomas Sowell. He is also a black fellow, and he is phenomenal. It's funny. I want to point out something about both Thomas Sowell and Walter Williams. I have occasionally, they have spent decades researching race issues, these very issues, like, what's the cause, what should we be seeing, so on and so forth. So they have provided countless books and material, articles and whatnot, after having studied it for decades. And so sometimes I'll counter somebody online and they'll be like, "Oh, you're just picking out a black person because they agree with you." It's really funny about that. And here's a good pushback because it's true. You tell that person, "No, you're the racist because you're starting with the assumption that a educated black person could not be the influence of me." Right? Like, 'cause I got to thinking about that one day. I was like, "Well, I'm not a racist." I learned from these guys. And then I was like, "Wait a minute. You're assuming I didn't learn from them. You're assuming that I came in and went searching for a black person to say what I wanted them to say. No, no, no. That was not it at all. I actually learned from these guys and some others." So, if somebody accuses you of trotting out a token, you let them know that that token is responsible for your being more educated. If that's the case, I mean, don't lie. I mean, obviously, if it's not the case, well, then, you got to be honest. So, at the end of the day, the best thing we can do, let's wrap this up and then I'm going to go into my closing. Again, the best thing we can do, just three things, three: end the war on drugs, end occupational licensing, and stop trying to help people with clever things that require specific people to be able to implement that all of us regular average Joes that it doesn't make sense to, right? Like, stop doing that. Like, just allow people to be successful on their own. And if you see an actual barrier, a real barrier, which in government, there are many, many barriers to success for minorities, start removing those for a change. Okay. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this episode and you found it informative and inspiring. Be sure to catch me Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. Eastern, for an informed discussion on politics and culture. Then again, Sundays at 7 p.m. with my co host, Susan Hogarth, to discuss LP happenings. Be sure that you are subscribed to my YouTube channel or my Rumble channel if you prefer. You can go to youtube.libertydad.com or you can go to rumble.libertydad.com. And while you're there, make sure you subscribe and do me a favor. Let me know how I'm doing by dropping in a comment. Let me know. Tell me ways that I can improve. I may or may not listen, but I'll definitely read it. Remember, if you are a champion of liberty, your business is people and your product is liberty. I want you to have a great week. I will catch you tomorrow. But for now,